Assalamualaikum. Today we are going to tell you about sulfur cycle and sulfur bacteria.
What is sulfur? A chemical element that occurs naturally as a pure element. It is an abundant and a bright yellow crystalline solid when at room temperature. An essential element of life that is vital and widely used in the biochemical cycle. Most of the Earth's sulfur is tied up on rocks and salts buried in the depth of the ocean. Sulfur is important to plants and animals for their enzyme and for the proteins to function. Sulfur also present in amino acids, vitamins, and enzymes. Sulfur is used for things such as fertilizers, matches, and insecticides. Sulfur cycle. Step 1. The sulfur is released by the weathering of rocks. Step 2. Sulfur comes in contact with air and is converted into sulfates. Step 3. Sulfates are taken up by plants and microbes and are converted into organic forms. Step 4. The organic form of sulfur is then consumed by the animals through their food, and thus sulfur moves in the food chain. Step 5. When the animals die, some of the sulfur is released by decomposition while some enter the tissues of microbes. And the last step is, there are several natural sources such as volcanic eruptions, evaporation of water, and breakdown of organic matter in swamps that release sulfur directly into the atmosphere. This sulfur falls on Earth with rainfall.
So now, we already know the sulfur cycle. Let's take a look why we need sulfur in our life. Plants need sulfur to make protein and enzyme. Sulfur also needed in the formation of chlorophyll. Besides, plants, animals and humans also need sulfur. Sulfur contains compounds that have metabolic, structural and regulatory function. For example, collagen in our body is made of sulfur amino acid. Because sulfur is not stored in body, animals' diet should contain relatively constant supply of sulfur to maintain their health.
Now, we are going to look at what is sulfur bacteria. Sulfur bacteria are microorganisms that are capable of metabolizing sulfur and its compounds. Sulfur bacteria source their energy from sulfur substances like hydrogen sulfide, thiosulfate, and sulfide. Sulfur bacteria are used in industries to detoxify and extract pollutants from mine waste.
There are three types of sulfur bacteria that contribute to the sulfur cycle. First is sulfate-reducing bacteria. Second is sulfur-reducing bacteria. And third is sulfur-oxidizing bacteria. What is sulfate-reducing bacteria? Sulfate-reducing bacteria is an anaerobic bacteria that can be psychophilic, mesophilic, thermophilic, or halophilic, which makes it limited. The genre of this bacteria is Disulfobrevido, Disulfomonas, Disulfotamuculum. Sulfate-reducing bacteria introduces to the reduction of the sulfur cycle, which makes sulfate using ATP to ADP-SO4 using the process of phosphorylation, and lastly, making hydrogen sulfide. The final electron acceptor for the reducing sulfate bacteria first is sulfate when using anaerobic oxidation, and second is oxygen when aerobic oxidation where there is oxygen. This process uses either lactate, pyruvate, fumarate, malate, citrate, ethanol or glucose and making it to acetate and carbon dioxide. The second type of sulfur bacteria is sulfur-reducing bacteria, which is anaerobic bacteria, same as sulfate-reducing bacteria. The electron acceptor in fermentation is intracellular sulfur and extracellular sulfur. The reduction process of sulfur-reducing bacteria, converting sulfur in the form of elemental or organic molecule or disulfide bond to hydrogen sulfide, thus providing energy for the plant during nighttime. The third sulfur bacteria is sulfur oxidizing bacteria. It oxidizes ferrous sulfide in coal mining waste. The acid they provide is extremely toxic to fish and other organisms in streams. The example is tuberculosis. The similar bacteria convert hydrogen sulfide or ferrous sulfide or elemental sulfur to sulfuric acid using oxidation process. The oxidation process making sulfur to sulfate, thus reducing the pH from 1 to 2.
Now we are going to talk about purple sulfur bacteria. The purple sulfur bacteria are part of a group of proteobacteria capable of photosynthesis, collectively referred to as purple bacteria. They are anaerobic or microaerophilic and are often found in stratified water environments, including hot springs, stagnant water bodies, as well as microbial muds in intertidal zones. Unlike plants, algae, and cyanobacteria, purple sulfur bacteria do not use water as their reducing agent and therefore do not produce oxygen. Instead, they can use sulfur in the form of sulfide or thiosulfate as the electron donor in the photosynthetic pathway. The sulfur is oxidized to produce granules of elemental sulfur. These, in turn, may be oxidized to form sulfuric acid. The purple sulfur bacteria are largely divided into two families, the Chromatiaceae and the Ectothyroidospiraceae, which produce internal and external granules respectively and show differences in the structure of their internal membranes. They make up part of the order Chromatiales included in the gamma subdivision of the proteobacteria. The genus Halothiobacillus is also included in the Chromatiales in its own family, but it is not photosynthetic. Next, we are moving on to the characteristics of purple sulfur bacteria. Firstly, the major photosynthetic pigment is either bacterial chlorophyll A or B. The location of photosynthetic pigments are plasma membrane and chromatophore, lamellar membrane complexes that are continuous with the plasma membrane. The photosynthetic electron donors are hydrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur. The sulfur deposition is inside the cell. And lastly, the metabolic type is photolithoautotroph. The next sulfur bacteria is green sulfur bacteria. The green sulfur bacteria, Chlorobiaceae, are a family of obligately anaerobic photoautotrophic bacteria. Together with the non-photosynthetic Ignaeibacteriaceae, they form the phylum Chlorobi. Green sulfur bacteria are non-motile except chloroherpetin thalassium, which make light, and capable of anoxygenic photosynthesis. In contrast to plants, green sulfur bacteria mainly use sulfide ions as electron donors. They are autotroph that utilize the reverse tricarboxylic acid cycle to perform carbon fixation. Green sulfur bacteria have been found in depths of up to 145 meters in the Black Sea with low light availability. Characteristics of green sulfur bacteria. Firstly, the major photosynthetic pigment is either bacterial chlorophylls A plus C, D, or E. The location of photosynthetic pigment are chlorosomes and plasma membranes. The photosynthetic electron donors are hydrogen, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur. And lastly, the sulfur deposition is outside of the cell.
There are some effects of sulfur on nature. natural weathering of rocks and landforms. Volcanoes release large amounts of sulfur dioxide gas into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide gas can react chemically with oxygen, dust particles, and water to form volcanic smoke.
Sulfur bacteria are mostly involved in the treatment or bioremediation of industrial wastes. Here are some other examples of the application of sulfur bacteria. For instance, green sulfur bacteria are used to remove pollutants, for example, sulfite, from industrial liquid waste. Meanwhile, sulfur-reducing bacteria are used in industrial processes to generate hydrogen sulfides for metal precipitation. Where metal precipitation is the removal of heavy metals from industrial waste water. On the other hand, sulfate-reducing bacteria has been applied to treat acid mine waters from metal and coal mines which contain an abundance of sulfide materials with toxic metals such as copper and iron. Other than that, sulfate-reducing bacteria are also used to reduce hydrocarbons, which include crude oil and diesel, to clean up contaminated soil and waters due to agricultural activities and oil spills. Sulfur oxidizing bacteria are used to increase soil fertility by enhancing nutrient availability. This is done by converting sulfide and sulfur compounds into sulfates in soil. The resulting decrease in pH helps solubilize nutrients like phosphates, which can then be utilized by plants. This particular type of sulfur bacteria are also used in the bioleaching of metals, where bioleaching is the extraction of valuable metals, for example copper, from low-grade ores using microorganisms. The main bacteria genus used in the bioleaching of metals is Acidithiobacillus.
These are some facts about sulfur. Did you know that sulfur deficiency can lead to problems? For example, amino acids need certain amount of sulfur to create connective tissues to support your joints. A deficiency of sulfur could contribute to joint pain and disease. But ingesting too much sulfur also leads to problems. These may cause a burning sensation or diarrhea. Sulfur in excess can cause brain cell death, resulting in brain damage. Now you know.
That is all from us. Thank you.